I'm Barbara Mead. I'm one of the owners here at Politics Prose. And this afternoon, I want to welcome Ben Wittes. Actually, Ben has a new book, Detention and Denial. Actually, this is his fourth time that he has come to speak about a book at Politics Prose. He was here before for Law in the Long War. It has some title, The Future of Justice in the Age of Terror. So you can see that this subject matter has been on his mind for a long time. Actually, by his own description, that he says, and I'm quoting him, counterterrorism has grabbed him and refused to let him go. During the last 4 years, Ben has been a senior fellow in governance studies at Brookings Institution, and previous to that, he served for 9 years as an editorial writer for the Washington Post. And currently, he also serves on the Hoover Institution Task Force on National Security and the Law. I was just talking to Ben about that group, which sounds like that they have fascinating discussions about this whole area, including policies on preventative detention. It's a tough area, and it's most of all tough, I think, though, but Ben will have to tell us later of trying to get practice in line with policy. And even before getting practice in line with policy, of just being able to hammer out policy which is clear and understood by all. When President Obama came to office, he promised to shut down Guantanamo, but that has been more difficult to implement than it was to promise. It's still open, as we know, and in the spring of 2008, Ben Wittes testified before the Senate Judiciary Committee that by his count, or estimate, that there were still 100 detainees at Guantanamo that were too dangerous to release, yet they could not face criminal charges in an American criminal court. So that's the dilemma. Ben has written a very concise book to spell that out, and actually he comes up with a model law that he thinks would go toward solving the problem. And here he is to tell us about it.
Thank you. So I always really enjoy speaking here because, among other things, I actually do a lot of writing downstairs whenever I want to be away from my phone. And it's one of the sort of joys of a neighborhood bookstore like this, that you get to work in it and write in it and then talk about your writing in it. It's all very sort of one stop. So as Barbara says, I don't quite know how I became somebody who detention policy kind of grabbed by the butt and wouldn't let go. I found myself a couple years ago, a journalist called me and said she wanted to talk to me about detention policy, and I called her back very quickly and said, I'm glad you called this. It's a subject very close to my heart. And I realized that I had just said that detention policy was a matter very close to my heart, which I'm not really sure what that says about my heart. Well, what I wanted to do today was talk a little bit about sort of what the purpose was of the book, and sketch out very briefly what the argumentative trajectory of it is, and then read two excerpts from it, one of which sort of is an effort to sort of set up the problem that the book is an effort to address, and the other of which is a account, I think, of the costs of not addressing that problem. So this is dense material, and it's morally difficult material, and it's legally difficult material. The purpose of the book, in short, is to try to do what my late colleague at the Post, Peter Milius, used to call breaking through to higher ground. Peter was a longtime editorial writer for the Post and a very thoughtful guy. And he sometimes I would write an editorial and he would kind of read it over my electronic shoulder from his office, and then he would come into my office and he'd say, "The trouble is you need to break through to higher ground here." And what that mean was really was that I was talking at completely the wrong level of altitude, and he would then, I guess the nice way to put it would be edit, and the less nice way to put it would be rewrite what I had done, and at a completely, sometimes no words would be in common. They would be all exactly the same material, written from a completely different focal length. And you realize that a lot of the sort of unnecessary, well, a lot of what you thought was necessary detail was actually completely extraneous, and that the broad themes were much more important than the narrow technical jargony detail. And so for the last several years, I've been living in the land in detention policy of the granular policy detail. And what I wanted to do here was try to force myself to act like an editorial writer again, and to back out, zoom out, and write about it from a very high level of altitude, and with the question of why would anybody care? What are the sort of big themes that anybody would care about here? And why is it important? Because I think the reason at the end of the day that this sort of was the subject that grabbed me and wouldn't let go is that there are actually some very big themes here and some very important themes here. And they're often lost in what gets talked about so often as a morality tale. And this is true from both right and left, that you have a sense of a larger morality tale, whether it's that we reneged on the rule of law and now we have to restore it, whether it's that there's a base called Guantanamo that is the sort of source of evil that has to be closed, or whether it's at a more, those are sort of the left morality tales. And then there's the right morality tales that were sort of forsaking war. We're not sort of giving war a chance, right? We're not defending America. We're not doing the things that we need to do to keep America safe, to use the appropriated name of an interest group that has formed around that theme. So I guess the broad point that I was interested in developing here is that we have a lack of, almost 10 years after this problem confronted us, we have made remarkably little progress towards solving it. And if you think about what was the state of play in the fall of 2001 and the winter of 2002, it was that we were capturing large numbers of people. We didn't know where to put them. We didn't know what really to call them. And we didn't know what rights they should have and what we should do with them and how we should think about them conceptually. And what we did was we sort of created a kind of an ad hoc solution for this problem, or a series of ad hoc solutions, none of which we were comfortable with. And we started arguing with ourselves, are they more like criminals? Are they more like prisoners of war? Are they something else? And if you think about it today, where are we? We're still uncomfortable with the facilities, with the locations. We're still uncomfortable with the question of sort of who are they? Are they more like criminals? Are they more like prisoners of war? Are they more like something else? And we're still uncomfortable with the question of what rights should we give them. And we're so uncomfortable with that last question that the question of what rights we give them becomes intimately associated with geography. So if they're at Guantanamo Bay, we give them one set of rights. If they're at Bagram, or what we now call Parwan or DFIP, we give them a completely different set of rules. If we bring them into the criminal justice system, we give them a completely different set of rules. And so we are still sort of arguing with ourselves in this very kind of crude sort of way about the sort of most basic aspects of this policy area. And we're still sort of locked in a sort of comparative discomforts between our various options. And so one thing we have done as a result of this, and this is really the subject that the book was designed to, I would say, argue with, is that we have tried to avoid these questions rather than try to answer them. And the means that we have used to try to avoid them are very perverse. So one thing that we've done is we've tried to the extent that we can to detain fewer people. Now that seems like a very good thing. Like if you can use less detention, that's good. Unless the question then becomes, what do you do instead? Now, it's sort of a commonplace part of the argument now that, well, we're not capturing people anyway, we're blowing them up anymore, we're blowing them up instead. That's actually a very sort of crude description, and I think it's probably not, in the hard form that I just said it's not accurate. But what is certainly accurate is that we are using proxies to detain people whom we used to detain. And this is a very convenient thing to do if you can get the Afghan government, if you can build up the Afghan government to do detentions that we used to have to do. The result, of course, is that you don't have some of the legal problems that you would have if you were doing the detention yourself. You also don't have the political problems. Somehow, people don't care as much if it's not the United States doing it. But there's really a lot of costs to that. And there's a lot of costs to not doing detention yourself when it's actually your detentions that are at stake. So let me just sketch out very briefly what the sort of argumentative trajectory of the book is, which is it starts by sort of talking about how we have passed up opportunities as a society to address these issues. And we've had a lot of them. And a lot of different institutions of American government and American politics have had opportunities. So the Bush administration had a lot of opportunities, and it passed them all up. And it did so for one set of reasons, which is that it was very afraid of ceding any executive power to any other institution. It could never, even when it really understood that it was going to pay big costs for not taking responsibility for some of these choices it was very paralyzed in its ability to say, okay, we need to sort of cut our losses and make some choices here in the form of institutionalization of these authorities. The Obama administration, which came in with, I thought a sort of historic opportunity to change this, didn't for a, I think, remarkably interesting reason, which is that not that it was afraid of giving up executive power, it was afraid of how much power Congress would give it if it asked for Congress's help. And so for almost the opposite reason, it ended up adopting a very similar legal posture with respect to detention. The Supreme Court, which doesn't take enough blame in this conversation, announced that the courts had jurisdiction over Guantanamo cases, and then proceeded to announce that it wouldn't articulate any of the rules that would govern that detention, those detentions. That was a remarkable abdication of responsibility.